Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of Pod Strickland. I'm your host Shwin and in this episode 505. I am joined as always by my co-host Stacy. That is at StacyPan89 on Twitter. Stacy, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. How about you?
Good. Doing just dandy. Hanging in there, waiting for the off season to arrive. Although maybe the off season did arrive yesterday. We'll talk about that. Before we get started, I do make a few announcements. First, being that Strickland has a YouTube channel where you may watch this podcast. If you are not done so already, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment. That'd be a huge help to us. The Strickland also has merchandise you can find on our website at www.strict.land. There's a link that'll take you to the merchandise store. There's all kinds of cool stuff on there, like t-shirts, sweatshirts, hats, coffee mugs, water bottles, you name it, we got it. Strickland also has Patreon, which you can subscribe to. There are a number of different tiers. There's a $6 tier that gets you access to Pod Strickland's podcast host every Friday with Perez. You also get access to Takes from Obvious Bozos, a podcast hosted by Andrew Steele, aka Doug, along with Zach Ladder, and you get access to the Strickland Discord where the conversation never stops. There are further tiers. There's a $9 tier that gets you access to Strickland Own Life Solo Pod, which is no longer a solo pod. That is a podcast that I know now host along with YC. You also get access to Strickland NFL, which you guessed it, is a podcast about the NFL that is hosted by Constantine Metricos and Desmond Novak, and you get access to one of premium articles by Matthew Murdo, one of the best in the business. There are further tiers. There's $15 tier, $30 tier, $50 tier, and a $100 tier that's with a variety of additional benefits, like listening under product warnings, merchandise discounts, and potentially goes to podcast alongside yours for one day, whether you choose to subscribe or not necessarily possible without you. So without further ado, let's get started. The NBA Finals are going on. It is 2-2. Game 5 is tonight in Oklahoma City. But the NBA got its first major trade of the offseason. Yep, you heard that right. First major trade of the offseason during the middle of the NBA Finals. Memphis sending Desmond Bane to Orlando. They get back Kentavious Caldwell Pope. They get back Cole Anthony. They get back a 2025 pick in this year's draft, this number 16 pick overall. They get this is like a very bizarre thing that I figured out today. They get the second best of the Wizards pick, the Suns pick, or the Magic's first round pick next year. In all likelihood, that will be the Suns pick. They also get Orlando's pick in 2028 and 2030 unprotected, and they get a first round pick swap in 2029 that's top 2 protected.
Can I ask a question, actually?
Yeah.
If the Wizards pick conveys, don't we own that? So how does that work with this?
The Wizards have the right to swap. I mean, I guess if the Wizards pick conveys, this would change everything. I'm assuming the Wizards pick is not going to convey. I don't know what would happen if the Wizards pick doesn't convey. I'm assuming then they would get Orlando's pick and the Wizards would be shit out of luck. I don't really know, actually. It's a good question. I think the Wizards might just be shit out of luck then because they don't have a first. I don't think in next year's draft that they could swap. So I don't know. Good luck to them. I am assuming, again, that they'll successfully manage to hold on to their top 8 protected pick since Cooper Flagg will not be a Wizard. But yeah, I thought, I don't know, I'll curious to get your thoughts on this. I just thought the take that what I thought was most interesting about this is like, whatever you think about the trade, I thought it was very funny comparing like the reactions to this to the reactions to the Gobert trade or the reactions to the Bridges trade last season, where it was like there was no like analysis of the context. There was no appreciation for like, well, if you're trading for said player, this is already a good team. They're probably going to stay good for a while. These picks are not that valuable. But I thought it was pretty interesting to see how everybody was like a little bit more nuanced about this. I don't love this trade for Orlando. I get it. And I think maybe it's hard to. I think the easiest thing to do is be like, well, that's too much value for Bane. And I do think it's an overpay for Bane, just like I thought we overpaid for Mikal Bridges, just like I think the Timberwolves overpaid for Rudy Gobert. But at some point, like, you have to kind of make a move or you can lose your opportunity to strike. I don't know that this was the perfect player, the perfect time, or whatnot. But if you believe in Paolo and Franz, I think it's a justifiable gamble to take. And Yeah, I mean, I guess just looking at it from the Orlando point of view, just because that kind of affects the Knicks maybe a little bit more directly, seeing that they're in the conference, I think it makes them better. I don't even, there's really no doubt about that to me. It absolutely makes them better. Do I think that they're truly pushing the teams at the top of the East? I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. They still do have ammo to make moves. They will have one. They will have a first next year, if I kind of am reading the tea leaves correctly. So they still should be able to trade their own pick or one pick in 2026. They also have their pick in 2032, which will open up this offseason. So they still have those two picks to trade. They have a bunch of contracts and numbers they can move around if they want to. They are operating now they are hard capped at the second apron for next season after this trade. Memphis is hard capped at the first apron. Again, we'll talk about Memphis a little later. But yeah, I guess just like what are your thoughts about the trade for Orlando and kind of how do you see them measuring up in the East, with teams like obviously our Knicks, but also, the Pacers who are in the NBA Finals, the Cavs, who I think it's fun to clown them for losing 4-1 in the second round, but that was a weird series. They had some injury stuff going on. I think they're better than that performance shows, and I don't think they're going anywhere, even if I'm a little skeptical of some of the Jared Allen of it all. But yeah, just how do you kind of, what was your takeaway, or what were your thoughts when you saw the trade, and where do you think they stack up now that you've had kind of like 24 hours here to absorb it and think about it?
Yeah, I like the trade for Orlando. I think I forget who it was on Twitter, but she mentioned that it's a little unfortunate because Orlando like brought out the money cannon for KCP, and they got that style of player, a much better player, obviously, but they had to pay the premium of the picks, right? So it's unfortunate, I guess, but free agency doesn't work the way it used to. It's unfortunate for them. I like this trade a lot for Orlando. I think they're in a tough spot because we look at their creators, we look at Paolo and Franz, and we're like, not quite good enough to be a lead creator, but they're also playing in poor spacing. So which one is it, right? Is it that the spacing is not allowing them to create, or is it that defenses can key on them, or is there just fundamentally these are two 6'10 guys, 6'10 creators, let's face it, are very rare. And I think Bane is a way to kind of get at both of those. He helps you at spacing, but he can play on ball a little bit. He has that movement ability, the connectability, which I think they were looking for from Anthony Black, and maybe they'll still get, but obviously he's too young to provide that now. And it should help make the lives of, they have 3 creation bets: Suggs, Wagner, and Paolo, not in that order. It should help make those guys' lives easier. I actually think Bane is a little bit overrated as a defender, but Memphis has constructed good defenses around him, and that's what Ja Morant, who is a negative defender. So I like this a lot for Orlando, and for all the talk about, well, does that put them along the Eastern Conference elite? Well, Paolo is, I think, still, 21, 22?
21, I think.
Yeah. Franz, I think, is a couple years older, 23, 24. So I'm probably aligned with you on Paolo.
Paolo is 22. He'll be 23 in November.
Right. So that's still pretty young. I am with you. I think there's fundamental issues with this game, but this is a guy who has been a playoff riser. He's put up numbers in the regular season despite a non-optimal context, and it's not unreasonable for him to get better. Not just in terms of just shooting better, but also evolving his play style, if not transforming it. So I like this trade for a lot for Orlando. Am I immediately going to put them in the conversation with New York, Indiana, or Cleveland? Assuming, Boston is, I think, taking a year off, right? So no. Am I even going to put them completely ahead of Detroit? No. But the part of that is I don't have that proof of concept. I think the talent on paper, they have the ability, because they're already a pain in the ass to play against. Like if Detroit made this trade, or maybe not this trade, but if Detroit, maybe if Detroit got Bane, I think given what they showed in the playoffs, given what they showed in the regular season, we would say they're viable. You can't. I think you have to see the proof of concept, but I'm not down on this trade for Orlando at all. And the other thing I'll echo, you kind of hinted at this. I think first round picks unprotected are just not as valuable as they used to be before for anyone. And there's multiple factors there. One, I think teams are just taking into account that that they're like, it used to be unprotected, anything can happen. I think we've seen this when looking at the way assets are evaluated. Anything can happen, or kind of a blunt instrument. I think teams are now looking at, like, realistically, how many of these picks are going to be in the 20s or outside the lottery. They are taking that into account more than they used to. You have the second apron, which means that a guy on a manageable salary is more valuable. A star guy who you have cost, or a very good role player who you have on a cost-controlled salary, can be more valuable than those picks, especially if you expect them to be in the late 20s. And the last thing is, even with that worst case scenario, unprotected, there is because of the lottery odds changing, now you only have a 14% chance the first pick. So all of those directions, right? I think I'm not going to say that the first round pick value is, I said lesser. I think that high end tail is a little bit blunted. And on the other hand, you could say that the low end is still more valuable because teams are better at scouting. But that's changed kind of the crazy. It's crazy you're putting all this risk, this downside risk, by trading all these unprotected picks. So all in all, I like it for Orlando. I think it was good for Memphis too. I personally think that Memphis would be best advised to blow it up. Jiren Jackson is in a contract year. Ja has not looked the same, or he didn't look the same this year. And as is, because he's a point guard that doesn't shoot very well and doesn't defend very well, there are issues with building around him. Memphis could blow it up. They could also use those picks to try to get a star next to Jackson and Ja, which is what I think people think they're going to do. But yeah, those are my thoughts on it.
Yeah, sticking with Orlando. I don't know. I just, cards on the table. I'm not a believer in Paolo. I don't see it. He doesn't get to the rim at a high level. And yeah, you can tell me about the context and whatnot. I think I could understand if he's getting to the rim and not finishing at a high level. That would be understandable to me. I think for him to not be able to get to the rim, just in general, like, to me, that's not just about spacing. And I think it's giving him a little bit too much benefit of the doubt in that case. Like, I'm not saying he's RJ Barrett. I do think he's like a higher level prospect, and he's shown more than RJ did. But like, there is an RJ Barrettness to that, of like, well, it's the context, and wait till he plays with better spacing and the finishing will come along. And it's like, all right, like, at some point, maybe he's just not a particularly good dribble penetration guy. Like, that's reasonable. He's a big wing. He might not be kind of suited to being a primary offensive engine effectively. And if that's the case, then, they can get better. This move will still make them better, but there's just a cap on what they're going to be, because Franz is never going to be that guy, which is fine. Like, he's good. Bane is obviously not going to be that guy. Suggs is definitely
Franz kind of was that guy though when Paolo got hurt. It's a small sample size, but
I'm very comfortable saying that Franz is never going to be the primary offensive engine of like a championship team. I'm confident in saying that. Like, if people want to disagree or push back or say we can't know that for sure, that's fine. Like, we can't know it for sure. We will never know it for sure until their careers are over. But I feel confident in saying that as much as I like Franz, and I like him quite a bit, he's not going to be that level of offensive creator.
So across 25 games, they went 16-9. He was putting up, I think, like 25, 7, and 5 on pretty solid efficiency.
And what was their team's offense?
Rated or
Yeah, because like anybody can put up numbers if I'm just gonna have to do everything.
yeah, but he was reasonably efficient, right? That's kind of the point. And low turnovers. I think the offense as a whole was probably mediocre. They don't have a lot of offensive talent, but it gives you some proof of concept, especially if they're a high-end defensive team anyway, right?
So this is the first 25 games you're talking about, right?
No, it was. I think it was in the middle of the season, wasn't it? Like Paolo played 5 games. That's when Jonah
Well,
was like, "I
Franz played the
love that
first.
people like him better than Brunson." All that.
Franz played the first 25, and then he got hurt for a while. That's what I'm pretty sure it's the first 25 games. These are their games. This is who they played.
Yeah.
At Miami, Brooklyn, at Memphis, Indiana at home, at Chicago, at Cleveland, at Dallas, at OKC, at Indiana. By the way, all these good teams they played are basically losses. New Orleans, Washington, Charlotte, Indiana, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Clippers, Lakers, Detroit, Charlotte, Chicago, Brooklyn, New York, Philly. I don't know, man. I like Franz a lot, but at the end of the day, we're talking about a guy who shot 29.5% from three. This is his second year in a row he's under 30% from three. This was his second least efficient season of his career after his rookie season. By effective field goal. This is actually his lowest. This is crazy. It's his second lowest effective field goal percentage season of his career. It is his lowest true shooting percentage season of his career this past season. Look, good player. I think he can make an all-NBA team at some point in his career, maybe multiple of them. This guy's never going to be a primary offensive engine. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. And Paolo Banchero, I'm very skeptical of it. I don't see it with him. I don't think he gets enough good shots. I think his touch is just not that good. He's good at getting to the free throw line. He's not a particularly great free throw shooter. He's not demonstrated a strong ability to shoot the ball from beyond the arc. And ultimately, if you're building with Franz and you're building with Paolo, one of these guys has to be able to shoot. At some point, one of them has to be able to shoot at a high level. Honestly, both of them really need to be able to shoot at a competent level. But one of them certainly has to become a legitimate pull-up shooter of some kind. Bane makes them better. Suggs being healthy, presumably next season, will make them better. Although it's worth noting that his shooting percentages also came down last year after his third season. You know, what's real, what's not, we don't know. So these guys are young, so it could still go either way with the shot, or maybe it levels out below at a level that you kind of did not expect. Point is, like, I think there is, and I think people are doing this a lot. I've seen this a lot when people talk about the Pistons too, where it's like, I get it. These are young teams. They're kind of new. It's exciting. You're like, oh, Paolo's 22. What could he be when he's 25? You know, Cade's 23. What could he be when he's 25, 26? And, you know, obviously both of them, you know, they made the playoffs. Pistons first time this year. Orlando second time consecutive. But I think there's a danger of, like, being so kind of bullish about a team like this where you're like, oh, man, these guys are so young. They could be anything. And they could. It's not wrong. I mean, people should project upside and have, you know, however they feel about that stuff. But I still don't think either team is a legitimate contender in the East. And to the point you made earlier, I think if Detroit had made this move, you know, let's say whatever, you know, picks.
Hardaway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Beasley or Hardaway and, like, whatever. Let's say Tobias Harris and some other fucking contract filler or something. I don't know. I think I would feel better about them than I do about this Orlando team. Like, I kind of think Bane is a perfect fit for a lot of teams. He would play in every team's rotation, more or less. But for them, I I don't know. I'm just skeptical of the offensive upside with this group. Defensively, I think he slots in fine. He's a bit of an overrated defender to me personally. I think he has a much better rep than what his actual ability is. Not to say he's a negative defender. He's certainly not. He's a positive defender. But he's, to me, more of like a positive cog in the machine type of defender versus this guy can help mask others' deficiencies. They don't need him to be that, by the way. They have a really good defense, like you mentioned. So that's probably more than enough for them. But I think it's worth thinking about all that. The one thing I will, though, push back on that I've seen, I don't know, way too much of, I didn't even agree with it last year when people were saying it or when the contract was signed. I've seen a lot of people be like, Bane, man, I don't know about that contract. I'm like, I think that contract is fucking totally okay for him. He is like going to be making just under 25% of the cap. I think it's something like 24 to 22% of the cap through the duration of the contract. He's got 4 years left on it. I think it's about 163 million left. That isn't a concern to me at all. I think the contract is at worst, I would say it's neutral value. I think it's about what he's worth. He's probably something like the 40th best player in the league or something along those lines. Like, he's a really good player. The contract is fine. He has a skill set that any team will want and therefore should retain trade value. If down the line, maybe in a year or two, they're like, this isn't actually the thing. We got to move on from Bane. I think he'll still have plenty of trade value. Probably not as much as they traded out to get him, but certainly enough to recoup value. And also to the point about picks, it's like, at some point we got to consider that GMs are not operating as if picks have good players have more value than picks. That's what the market is telling us right now. That good players have much more value than draft picks, especially once you feel and you've established a baseline as a playoff team, because then you kind of know what those picks are going to be, right? Or you can project where it's like, okay, yeah, I don't love giving out first round picks, but is the next 2 first round picks we have, we think they're going to be something between 20 and 30. Is that more valuable to us than Desmond Bane over the next 3 years, right? For Orlando, I would say absolutely not. Bane is more valuable to you. Now, in 28 and 2030, when you still owe unprotected picks, maybe that calculus is going to be different. Who knows how these players kind of develop, how they age, what happens. But for the next few years or the next couple of years, I think the value you're getting out of Desmond Bane is worth way more to you than the kind of mystery box of draft picks.
Yeah, and like I said, with the even lotto odds, right? I mean, you're thinking about a worst case scenario in which like guys get injured or you way underperform. Even in that scenario, it's a 14% chance of the top pick. So it is. We've seen that with the Knicks, right? They were of course, the first year that the lotto odds changed, the Knicks had the worst record, and sure enough, that whole draft now looks a little bit weird, but the Knicks ended up third, right? So it's a squeeze from multiple sides. I do think people are still figuring out the CBA, and I think it's going to become apparent that with windows being so small, further out picks are going to be a lot more valuable. But I think right now people are willing to make that trade. And this is how the market is supposed to work, right? Teams that have different objectives. I don't really care about these picks right now. I want to contend. Or Memphis saying, I don't think we're getting anywhere. I want to reload and build my assets. It's a win. Those are why you have these win-win trades, right? We don't want to go in the luxury tax and pay this guy, but he works for you. Just let us break him down into smaller pieces, right? I think that's a good thing for the league and for the liquidity in the league. Trade liquidity.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how some of these picks, there's so many teams out there that are controlling a majority of the picks. It's interesting to see how that all comes out in the wash. One final tidbit on the Orlando side. They got this pick swap by trading Phoenix 3 second-round picks. So the Phoenix Suns continue to make astounding moves. So congrats to them.
Sparty, no.
Yeah, but we'll get to them. I don't think so. But we'll get to them a little later in the pod. As far as the Memphis of it all, I think it's interesting. You said that you think that they should blow it up and kind of bottom out here. I think there's two ways I would look at this. One, given the flat odds, and yes, the West is strong. Yes, you have rising teams kind of that look like they're going to be factors in the West for a while that are probably better positioned than you and have better top talent than you. In the case of, say, obviously the Spurs, but already, Oklahoma City they are in the finals. They have a great chance of winning the finals, and they have so much kind of flexibility to maintain this core or consolidate and still keep depth as they move forward. So that's going to be tough to negotiate. And then you have a team like Houston, who has a lot of talent, but they also have a lot of flexibility. They have a lot of draft capital that they can work around with. You've got Luka in LA. It's not, it's not an easy conference to be in. And 3 years ago, having Ja, having, JJJ, and having Bane looked like a great foundation to be a long-time factor in the Western Conference, but that's changed due to a variety of reasons. I get trading Bane. I think he was their best trade piece. Like, he had the most value because he's played. He has the most valuable skill sets of anybody on the roster. And that's that. He's also a great shooter. We know how much a premium shooting is on the in the NBA today. When you say blow it up, though, with the other guys, I'm like very curious about what their trade value is, because Jiren Jackson Jr. is a really talented player. He's made 2 All-Star teams. He's been a Defensive Player of the Year. He's not going to extend. Right? So he's entering the final year of his contract. He's not going to extend because he can't get nearly as much on an extension as he would if he waits until free agency next summer. Now Memphis can open up cap space to renegotiate and extend his contract. That's possible. Maybe they do that. That's something that's been rumored. And that was actually kind of the thinking that would be what they did this offseason prior to the Bane trade. I don't know if the Bane trade is signaling that they're going to move in a different direction. That's possible. But if not, they still have that option. And then with Ja Morant, how much trade value does the guy even have? I really wonder that, because he's really talented, but he misses a lot of games. We know he's gotten into a bunch of trouble off the court last couple of years. He still can't shoot. He's a minus defender. Doesn't really have off-ball utility. I don't know how many teams are super interested in Ja Morant in 2025. At least not.
I think he would have more value than Fox did last year.
Yes, I do.
I think that's a fair baseline, right? The Spurs give up 2 firsts, one of them unprotected.
It was a weird trade because they had to do. I'll look it up right now. But yeah, it's it's just but who is even with Fox? We kind of knew that there was a market. We haven't heard anything about Ja. Now maybe that's because they're not shopping Ja. So without shopping him, maybe that's why those rumors aren't out there of what teams would give up to get him. But I also wonder if some of it is just that teams are not as high on him because of the off-court stuff, because of the fact that he can't shoot, because of the fact that he's not been a great leader the last few years and all those type of things. I think you're kind of looking at trading him at his lowest value almost right now. Maybe not his absolute lowest. I would imagine trying to trade him before last season would have been much harder. But I don't think his value is great right now. He's got 2 years left on his contract. And, so if you're not going to get great returns for these guys, does it make sense to trade them? I know what the argument would be. By trading them, even if you're not getting great assets in return for them, you're increasing the value of your own pick next season. or your picks moving forward. That's totally reasonable. But again, like, these are talented guys, and you do have a lot of draft capital now that you've amassed from this Bane trade. Is it possible that you can walk the middle path and rebuild on the fly with and around those two players? It's possible. And then I also just wonder, like, hey, this is a small market team, as anybody like Matt Moore would painfully, he will go to great pains to tell you. But, that is a consideration. They're a small market team. Do you want to trade a guy like John Morant who puts fucking people in the stands and hurts your bottom line? Like, this is already a market we know doesn't crush it with attendance, doesn't have the most populous fan base to fill arenas. So I do wonder about just the business element of it too, where it's like maybe in the basketball sense, I think you have a really clear-cut sell on why it would make sense. But as a business, entity, I wonder how like pitching that to your owner would come across, where it's like, hey, we want to trade the guy that everybody pays his money to come and see. It's like, our attendance already sucks. We're not doing that. So I wonder about all those things. I don't know. I think my gut is to agree with you that blowing it up makes the most sense. I just don't know if they're going to do it. And I don't know. I'm a little bit all over the place with that. And then if you look at their roster now, it's kind of funny thinking about like 2-3 years ago. It was like, oh my God, they have so much depth. Now you look at their depth and you're like, is this guy even good? Like, are we sure this guy is good? Like Vince Williams, we're sure he's good. Gigi Jackson, are we sure he's good?
Prez would get on you for definitely on Vince Williams.
Hey,
Santi Aldama. I still like their pieces. My conspiracy theory also was there is a team that has a bias towards Michigan State players and personnel in the front office and coaching that is on the trade market, and Memphis happens to have a guy who went to Michigan State that they are unlikely to be able to extend. So that was the wheel kind of spinning in my head. Jiren Jackson for Durant level trade. If Memphis doesn't want Durant, by the way, I think you and I would both think Durant and Ja as a combo would be hilarious. But that's what I was thinking too. I wonder if something happens, even if there's a third team where KD goes. If the Suns want Jaren Jackson. They also said they want a big, right? So that's why everyone linked them to Cat. But
the option. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit unsure of what Jiren Jackson's trade value is, given his contract, and just the fact that he's not going to extend this summer. Every team that acquires him knows that. So yeah, you have the advantage in re-signing him next year, but that's still kind of a big risk to take. I don't know if that's what you would do. Maybe you have assurances, back channeling, and you can figure that out. But I'm not sure I would take that risk. And then, so there's that. But as much as I can have some issues with Jaren Jackson's trade value, there's no way in hell I'm trading him straight up for KD. Because if I'm Memphis, if I'm trading Jaren Jackson, then I'm already committing to rebuilding. So why the fuck would I want KD?
If you believe in KD, Ja, more than you believe in Jaren Jackson, Ja.
I guess, but it just kind of doesn't make sense. You're shortening your window, and I don't know. I don't get that. I would not be for that if I were a Memphis fan. I don't think they will do it. I think people are probably drawing too much of a line there, where it's like, oh, they got this Phoenix pick, so they must want to get KD or Booker or something. And it's like, maybe they just wanted the pick because they, like any other team.
Oh, I don't think it has to do with that pick. Just
yeah, no, it's possible. I don't know. It's possible. I'd be shocked if the Grizzlies are like, well, we want to trade Jaren, so let's trade him to a team that isn't giving us picks and also isn't giving us a player who fits in our timeline. I mean, I guess what you could do is, can you flip Jackson or can you flip KD to a 13? I don't know. It just doesn't really make sense to me. I think you're better off just if you're going to trade Jackson, prioritize the right thing. I don't think KD would be the right thing.
Do you think if they called him when he got traded and his mom picked up, they'd be like, "I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, this is for real"?
Yeah,
it's gotta be a tough phone call to make.
I think that's exactly what Zach Kleiman definitely what he would have said to Jaren Jackson's mom. But yeah, I don't know. The blow it up rebuilding thing, it makes sense. I think it's easy to say they should do that, and maybe they should do it. I think they should do it probably. But it's hard, man. Like you kind of 3 years ago, you're thinking of yourself as like, man, maybe we could be a perennial contender, and now it's like we're blowing this up, and we've never even got a chance of really looking at this over the last few years because of injuries, because of suspensions, because of whatever. That's a tough place to be. And not only they lost their players, right, or not have they lost Bane and potentially maybe Jaren Jackson or John Morant, we're also talking about them having moved on from their head coach, right? Taylor Jenkins, who's interviewing with the Knicks this week, like he's gone too. So it's just been this whole sea change there, and it's kind of striking to see. So what I think is interesting with Memphis now, to tie this back to the Knicks since we are our Knicks podcast. Jiren Jackson Jr. is a player I know that the Knicks have been interested in. Or at least I know that he was a player they were kind of had on their list, so to speak, when Leon Rose took over. They hired his dad, who was I forgot what his exact role was, but he was with the organization with Westchester, the G League team, in some capacity for the first couple of years. He's no longer with the team officially. Not just something to keep an eye on. And we had Chris Persianen of KFS and of Clutch Points. He put out a report late last night, I believe, early this morning. And in it, he says that at least one key member of the Knicks' front office has long coveted Jackson Jr. as a trade target, sees Jaren Jackson Jr. and Cat as a dream pairing. I guess, and then the idea would be that you flip, Mikal Bridges in some way, for Jaren Jackson Jr. That could either be.
You'd have to do it with Mitch, right?
Well, no, you can just trade Mikal for him straight up. Doesn't have to be with Mitch. But yeah, if you wanted to, the trade that he put it in his article, which is just, his idea of what could work. It was Bridges, Mitchell Robinson, the Knicks sending the Memphis pick back to them, so their second round pick this year, number 50, trading that Washington protected first, and then trading 2 other second round picks to Memphis for Jaren Jackson Jr., John Conchar, and Vince Williams. Forgetting the rest of it, personally, I think a move where you're trading Mitch and Mikal Bridges for Jaren Jackson Jr. is a very big risk. The Knicks already, we already know that their depth is not the strongest suit of this team. I think to consolidate that even more for a player like Jackson Jr., who's had his own health issues, obviously not to the degree that Mitch Robinson has, but he's dealt with some stuff too. I think that's a really big risk. But even if we were to take out the Mitch of it, let's just say you trade Mikal to a third team sends picks to Memphis sends you Jaren Jackson Jr. What would you think about a trade like that? And I guess what are your thoughts about? Let's start with, what do you think of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s fit next to Karl Anthony Towns? Let's just start there.
I don't know that Cat has played next to a bad rebounder at the 5. You can say he was a pretty good rebounder. I think with him at the 5, the Knicks were league average defensive rebounding, and Jiren Jackson probably isn't worse than OG as a 4 person at the rebounding spot, or as a rebounder. There's part of me that wants to say this is shuffling deck chairs, shuffling deck chairs around a very healthy cruise ship. Let me add, not the Titanic. Because I think the dream would be if you could somehow keep Mikal. You play 5 out, but your 3 defenders next to your 2 subpar ones are Mikal, for all his flaws, is still very good at the point of attack, very good on ball, he can create off ball. OG's an elite wing defender at basically anything you ask him to do, and then you add a great rim protector as one DPOY. That's the way to make that work. If you're flipping in Jaren, you start Deuce, well, you lose rebounding. Do you start Hart? There's part of me that thinks that. On the other hand, I think it really comes down to how much do you buy the kind of creation leap that Jaren Jackson made, and how much do you think that'll continue to improve? The next step being able to do that in the playoffs, right? Because obviously it wasn't there in the playoffs, but he really showed a lot more in terms of being able to create. I know his rim numbers aren't great. Tyrese was mentioning this in the Strickland, but he is a stretch 4 or stretch 5, whatever you want to call it. So those are going to be limited, right? I thought he did a better job of getting to the hoop. I've seen that throughout his career, flashes of him bodying guys and, and being able to work off the bounce and create his own shot. Not a super pass-heavy guy, but neither is Mikal. But are you getting a defensive upgrade? Yes. Are you getting a 3-point upgrade? Potentially, yes. Especially if you play another shooter instead of Hart in the starting lineup. If you continue to start Hart, I think this is pretty much a lateral move. But, I think that it makes a lot of sense. I think you're adding a defensive player of the year level defender. You add a guy who can space for Cat, but also can run some pick and roll, and Cat is spacing. He's shown the ability to operate off the short roll. So to me, I get the appeal. How much are you giving up? And it's worth noting, I think you and I have both been defenders of Mitchell Robinson. Of Mikal Bridges. But you look at the player he was last year, and there's definitely contextual things they can do. I agree. But independent of Thibs, this is a guy that wasn't getting to the rim. It improved incrementally over the year, but still a guy that we saw him pass up on good shots at the rim to take fadeaways, right? We saw him, he's basically a guy who's very efficient in the mid-range, doesn't give you a whole lot else. He can run a pick and roll and he can get to the mid-range spot, isn't much of a playmaker. I do think his 3-point percentage will tick up, but there's an argument that Jiren Jackson, especially when you consider his height, gives you better, more functional spacing, right? He has that height and he has a low release, so maybe that evens it out. Just the type of player Bridges is not who I think they were expecting him to be when they traded for him. There's a reason to believe a new coach would change that. And another year of kind of adjusting and to his teammates, maybe he becomes a little bit more rim and contact oriented. Maybe a 3-point shot ticks up. He showed the ability to make some spectacular movement threes. Maybe with more movement and more flow, he'll get that. But if you're unsure about that, the fit with Jaren is a lot easier to look at. And you can say, we'll have rebounding issues. We'll figure those out later. So I get the appeal, especially if it's really functionally just Mikal for Jaren Jackson straight up. Because we're going to have to extend both anyway.
I have some reservations about it. I think in a vacuum, if you're just like, who's the better player, who's the superior talent, Jiren Jackson Jr. is a superior player to Mikal Bridges. I think that's probably true. And I think most people would agree with that. I don't believe I'm saying anything controversial there. Where I get concerned is I think the theory of Jaren Jackson Jr. with Cat is really good. Like I in theory, you're like two bigs that can shoot. One of them is a defensive player of the year or a past defensive player of the year. A really, really strong rim protector in a lot of ways. So he can protect Cat. in that sense, Cat's rebounding can maybe offset some of Jaren Jackson's weaknesses on the glass. I get all that. I think I understand the appeal. I see the vision. My concerns are now your wing depth is effectively in this scenario where it's just a straight up trade, more or less. Your wing depth becomes OG and Hart, and then you're betting on Dadier and McCullough. Now, maybe you can use the TPMLE or find something in free agency, but as it stands, that would be the wing depth. And, I think most people would say the wings, we were already pretty thin on the wing. So that concerns me. Another thing that concerns me is, let's say, obviously, if you do that trade, Jackson is starting. Okay, well then 2 is your 2 guard, right? Because we know Brunson's going to start. We know OG's going to start. We know Cat's going to start. We know Jaren Jackson Jr. would start. Who's going to be 2 guard? Is it going to be Deuce McBride? Okay. I mean, that could obviously be very good. Defensively, you have 3+ defenders in that lineup. I see that. I also think that's going to be a highly suspect rebounding group. You're talking about probably 3 guys, probably maybe 4, who are at best average rebounders for their position. And I think that's being generous in some ways. That's a concern. And then the biggest concern for me is simply that I think coming out of the postseason, the 2 things that I felt very strongly about in terms of like, these are areas the Knicks need to shore up going into the offseason. They did not have enough ball handling, playmaking. You can call it ball handling, playmaking for my liking. And they also didn't. I just felt they were a team that was suspect in their kind of basketball IQ in certain moments. We've all made the jokes, right? Like, oh, Josh Hart has CTE or whatever. Like, but what we're talking about is like this kind of habit of getting sped up, getting kind of like loose with the ball in key spots, or getting loose with the ball in pressure situations, and just general like ability to see the floor, make decisions with the ball in your hands, all those things. I don't see how Jiren Jackson helps you with any of that. Like, he is a guy, like, he has more turnovers than assists for his career, I'm pretty sure. I know for sure last year he had more turnovers than assists. Like, he's not a playmaker in any capacity. So for his career, Jiren Jackson Jr. actually has I don't know, actually I fucked this up. Oh no, sorry, looking at the wrong guy. Sorry. I was looking at Franz Wagner. So not Jaren Jackson Jr. Jaren Jackson Jr. for his career, he has 602 assists. This is in 7 seasons. 7 seasons, 602 assists. Do you want to guess how many turnovers he has?
602?
762. 762. He has not had a single season in his career where he's finished with more assists than turnovers. Not once. Has never happened. Last 2 years have been the best. He's gotten the closest. He had 154 assists in 2023-24 to 160 turnovers. This past season, he had 148 assists to 153 turnovers. He's at best a 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio guy. That concerns me a lot. I can't say it enough. I think that is a massive, massive concern. Is he a better scorer than Mikal Bridges? Yeah, probably. I don't know if, I think there's something to be said of like late game shot making, tight situation shot making, where I think Bridges probably has an edge, but Bridges isn't like some elite kind of shot maker in those moments either. So I'm not going to act like there's not a case for Jackson to be ahead of him. Jackson's been more efficient. But it gives me a lot of pause to bring into a team that's already lacking ball handling, decision making, all that stuff. It gives me a lot of concern to take out Mikal Bridges, who himself is not a particularly great ball handler or decision maker, but better than Jackson. that swap concerns me. And then also just the fact that Jackson and Cat, I mean, these two guys are like fucking long lost brothers or something because they constantly commit the dumbest fucking fouls you'll ever see in your life. Like they're always in foul trouble, both of them. Like this past season, if you just look at it if you look at, per 36 minutes, Jackson Jr. this past season, this was his second to best season or second best season ever in terms of foul rate per 36 minutes. It's a 4.2. What that tells me is you're a guy, if you're like 4.2, I mean, you're a guy that's a lot of nights, like you're going to, if I dial up the minutes for you, you're going to be in foul trouble. It's going to be a little bit of a slog. And that just worries me, man. Like, I just think there's too many significant holes in his game that, to me, outweigh the risk reward of taking the swing and kind of being like, this front court could be really, really awesome. I don't think he's enough of a playmaker. I don't think he's intuitive enough of an offensive player. I think that him and Cat and Brunson all like to get to the same kind of spots on the floor to do their scoring. I think they want to get downhill. I think they want to drive. That concerns me. I don't know. Like I see the vision, and again, I think it's very reasonable to compare these guys and come out of comparing them and being like, yeah, no, this is like, we got to do this. If this is on the table, we should do it. I'm just a little bit more apprehensive, and also like, I'll just say it, like, I think I would bet on Mikal Bridges having a much stronger season next year than he did this past season. I think this past season will look like an aberration in a lot of ways. I expect him to shoot better from three. I expect him to actually get to the rim with a little bit more verve. I think a new coach can do wonders for him offensively by just being a little bit more creative in terms of the sets, getting him more in motion, getting him opportunities to catch the ball on the move going downhill. I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit for him there. I would not trade him right now for Jaren Jackson Jr. That would be my conclusion. And it's kind of crazy because I think at some point in the middle of the season, we talked about this a bunch too. And I was like, yeah, I would do that in a second. But things change. And I just look at it now and it concerns me. And it's like, the funniest thing I think my takeaway too is I was like thinking like, all right, so if you trade for Jackson, then it's like, all right, do we need to start Hart then? So we like actually don't get killed on the glass. But then I'm like, why do I want to trade for somebody where I'm thinking, yeah, we got to have Hart on the floor. Like we have to have Hart on the floor with this group because I don't see how it lasts otherwise. I don't know. It's not, I don't think it's as straightforward as it might seem to some people. And I guess I've ended up on like, I think I just would rather keep Mikal. But I don't know. I'm not anticipating that we would have this option of making it a straight swap. The last thing I want to say about this too, because I think this needs to be remembered by people. I think there's a very good chance Mikal Bridges signs his extension this offseason. In fact, I'd be pretty surprised if he doesn't sign his extension this offseason. That's a 4-year, $156 million max extension. That's what he can get this summer. That's basically the extension that Jalen Brunson signed last year. That would make him something like the 48th, 49th, 50th highest paid player in the league. Okay, so it's not like he's getting paid some exorbitant amount in the scheme of the NBA anyway. Jiren Jackson Jr. is not going to sign his extension this offseason because the number that he can get, it just doesn't make sense for him. When he gets to free agency, you're going to have to give him his max at that point, probably, or close to it. Like, is he like a $45 million a year player to you, $50 million a year player to you? And then forget what he's worth to you in a vacuum. You also got to look at the team's cap sheet. There's a chance the Knicks could skirt under the second apron next season still. In all likelihood, they'll probably be over. But with Mikal Bridges, like, there's a chance you're not so far over it. That kind of evaporates with Jackson. And that is something to consider as well.
Yeah, so I think I would echo a lot of those thoughts, particularly with the cap. I will say, in terms of the playmaking, I'm probably a little bit higher on it than you are. So we do have to remember this guy is still 25. This is the age when we think of players still having room to develop when they're 22. The Knicks acquired Jalen Brunson. I think he was 25 at that time, right? Dante was 26, I think. Hart was 26. Randall, who had the leap here, was 24 when they got him. Really had the leap the second year. So I think the Knicks front office is very, very aware of that. In most of their acquisitions, besides, I guess, Cat, they've been at that age. In terms of the assist to turnover ratio, I would add that his assist numbers themselves have gone up the last 2 years. So he was closer to 1 to 2 in 2023. It was 1 to 1.7. The year before that, it was virtually the same. Last 2 years, he's averaged over 2 assists a game at about a 1-to-1 ratio. For a big, that's not terrible. That's basically what Cat is at in the regular season. So I do want to call that out. I do want to say that his personal fouls are an issue, but he's young. And per 100, they have decreased. They're still way too high. But his first year in the league, it was 7.2. I think that's like even higher than like Mitchell Robinson as rookie. Which, by the way, let's not discount that we've seen the Knicks have success in at least one foul-oriented guy, especially as a young guy. That's not really a huge concern for Mitch, or at least when he fouls, you would say that, right? Like Mitch doesn't really commit stupid fouls anymore.
Once in a while. Yeah, like once in a while, but everybody commits stupid fouls once in a while. He's matured significantly.
And that was a huge issue for him early in his career.
Yeah.
So Jaren Jackson last year was at 5.4, and it has gone down. He went 7.2, 6.7. This is per 100, by the way. So you had that 4.2 stat, which I believe was per 36. I'm using per 100, but it's gone down from over the course of his career. It's not crazy to suggest it would go down more. With Bridges, it's just like I definitely think they can run more stuff for him. I'd love to see more movement stuff. I'd love to see them. But the guy they got him opportunities getting downhill, but not an insignificant amount, right? They probably could have gotten him more. That rim reversion is very concerning and scary to me. As like if you're making this guy your third option, but really your second perimeter option, because Cat isn't like a creator like that. It's a weird fit. He is a weird player. You've said this a lot of times. Can that change? Is there an internal mentality shift he can make? Maybe. But it is a concern. Whereas Jackson is a more physical player. He doesn't get to the rim a ton. But he is a more physical player. And I think he's more confident finishing. I'm going to look up his... So only 12% of his attempts came at the rim this year. That is very low. But for his career, it's 22%. And of his twos, for his career, he's only at 55% assisted. Last year was a career low 45% assisted. So he creates a lot of his own twos. He gets the rim a decent amount. And when he's there, according to Basketball Reference, for his career, he's a 67% finisher. That's not elite for a 6'10", 6'11" guy, whatever he is. That's pretty solid. So I think I am, at this point, a little more optimistic on his creation than I am on Bridges. That's probably where I'm at. And then on defense, I don't think it's particularly close. There are probably point of attack assignments that Bridges can handle. But even, like, we saw him at the point of attack against Indiana, and he struggled because they run him through 1,000 screens. I don't know what Jiren Jackson's screen navigation is, but if neither is an option for those, right? If you're better off just playing deuce and moving them off ball, well, off ball, I definitely know who's going to be better. Like, if you had to ask me who would I rather have on Tatum or Jaylen Brown, I would pick Jaren, right? So I definitely think it makes the Knicks better. To your point, there are other constraints and other factors, but like even creation, which I think you pointed to as like the biggest worrywart in Jaren Jackson's game, there's reason to think he gives you more of that than Bridges, or more useful avenues to that than Bridges.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I get it. He's 25. Is that right?
25, yeah.
25. He'll be 26 in. He'll be 26 by the start of next season. So September 15th is his birthday. He'll be 26 by the start of next season. I wouldn't say that he's at the peak of his career. I think there's more for him to develop. But the playmaking thing for me is like he's just not going to be a playmaker. And as good as Cat can be as a passer, I think we saw some of his limitations as a playmaker, shot creator, advantage creator, however you want to phrase it, throughout the playoffs and through the back half of last season. These are guys that they can, I think there's room for Cat for sure to grow in this way, playing off of Brunson, better understanding in year two. I think hopefully Brunson also has to be part of that too. That's on Brunson as well. I think Jaren Jackson, like, is there scope for him to improve in terms of like how he plays off of a guy like Jalen Brunson? Sure, no doubt about that. But we're then talking about a team, and I understand that Bridges is not the greatest ball handler of all time or whatever, but you're losing even more ball handling now. Like you're putting even a greater onus on Brunson now to initiate in half court, to set guys up.
That's where I'm pushing back a little bit, because I do think there's part of me that thinks that actually Jackson is a better option for that than Bridges, because he's more physical, stronger, a little bit more variety in his shooting game, and he can get to the rim and finish.
But that's just finishing. That's why, like, he's just a finisher. He's not like creating for anybody else. That's never even if he's better at not turning the ball over now. Like he's just not a playmaker.
He's getting 2 assists a game for a big that's not poor, and he's going to have gravity, which should open things up for other guys.
I mean,
at best, I think it's a push. Like I think
it's 2 assists a game. Like, I mean, Bridges was, we would call him a subpar playmaker. He's at 3.7. That's like he basically doubled up Jaren Jackson Jr. And this was not even a season that any of us would be like, wow, what a fucking awesome season for Mikal Bridges. I just don't see a playmaking jump from Jackson to the point where I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I mean, I can't believe I'm saying this. Like, if you were to honestly just be like, hey, would you trade Mikal Bridges for Julius Randle, right? Let's just say that was like something we were talking about. I don't think I would do it. I wouldn't do it. But like, I could at least wrap my brain around like, well, Randle can collapse the defense, and like this would open up opportunities for Brunson to be off ball. Like, I don't think you're getting that from Jiren Jackson Jr. And it's not because he can't score, but his scoring is basically just like, it's a lot. They're not the same player, but it is a lot like Cat, where it's like he's going to drive, he's going to get into the lane, but he's not producing for anybody else out of that. And I'm not going to say that Mikal Bridges is some high-level creator, but I also think he gets his points in ways where you don't need to, like, you don't need to toss him the ball and it slows down, and then he's going to get downhill. I mean, the one thing you would say about Jackson, which is good, is if you were, not just the one thing, there are plenty of things about Jaren Jackson that are good. But if you are like, hey, we want to try and play faster this year. I don't know if that's the goal for the Knicks. I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But if you did want to play faster, this is a guy who's played, on some real fast-paced teams in Memphis. So he's comfortable getting up and down the floor, kind of getting into some of those frenetic type games that we got into, right, with Indiana. So I think there's a value to that. He's younger than Bridges, so there's value to just getting younger. I think I wouldn't call him an elite big man athlete, but he's on the border. Like, he's pretty fucking athletic for a big guy. And, with Jackson, you got to look at the positives in terms of like him and Cat could be good, right? Him and Mitchell Robinson, I think, would be fucking awesome together. And it can open up maybe different trade possibilities for you, right? Like, maybe you're not done kind of reshaping your roster. I might feel differently about this if you were to be like, all right, we're going to trade Mikal for Jackson, but then we can flip Josh Hart or whatever, let's just say Josh Hart for a wing who can slot into the starting lineup. Like that, I might feel better about that then.
Well,
But
hold on. If you're worried about Bridges, would you trade Jalen Brunson for Jaren Jackson?
no, I would not. No, I
You
would
can
not.
throw in Daddy to make it a sweetener. That
No,
way
I think I'd probably pass on that opportunity.
Go ahead, sorry.
But yeah, I don't know. So if you're going to be like, we're going to get Jackson, but then we're going to trade Hart, we're going to get a different wing who can shoot from the perimeter, and he'll be in the starting lineup and all of that type of shit. Like, okay, then I can maybe get around it. But I haven't seen the sequential trades that anybody suggested that would be part of that. And I don't know. I would be very weary of doing anything too crazy with this team, because I still believe that we did not get a good idea of what all these pieces can look like when they're put together in the most in a different context, really, under a different coach, using more combinations, being more willing to experiment with how we play, using different schemes defensively. Again, just maybe running more, being more creative offensively, more motion, all those type of things. I would be hesitant to make more big moves, especially if it requires multiple roster moves to kind of reshape and rebalance the roster we have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are like, well, now that they made the coaching move, they're probably not going to make a big move. I don't read it that way. I get it from like, if you're thinking of this as like an A/B test, like, all right, we had a biased sample last year because we didn't maximize the roster. We want to see what it looks like if it's maximized. I think everyone's an alert, and I really liked what we saw from Bridges, particularly on defense as the season went on. If they had another creator and he could just like hunt his shots off ball and move and be another guy like that, I would like him more. But I like a lot of the same concerns. His offense doesn't really create for others, right? He's getting to that mid range, or like because he doesn't have rim gravity, yeah, he can force help, but that's a shorter rotation, so someone can help at the nail to take away that midi. But it's like it can create a shot and get his assist. I do worry about that fit if his game doesn't change. But I do agree with you. Like, I think a lot of the people who are down on, I want to ask you this: do you feel like there's been kind of a rush, especially after Thibs got fired, to kind of attack Cat, attack Brunson, even attack Bridges in the trade, as a way to like kind of vindicate Thibs from national media, but even a lot of Knicks folks?
Well, I would say that's natural. It's natural for that to happen. 5-year coach who had success, more success than any coach this century has had in New York. Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable for there to be some kind of finger pointing at other figures. What I'll also say is a lot of people who will be critical of the players and of the front office and all the type of stuff, and that's fair. You can be critical of the players, you can be critical of the front office. There's no issue with that. They're all big boys. That's why they'll get paid millions and millions of dollars to handle that shit. They'll be the first people to constantly. This isn't the first time. Would be my point. It's always been like, well, it's ridiculous that Thibs lost this series to Miami. Well, what can he do? What could you expect? Jalen Brunson is his best player. Jalen Brunson's not an MVP. Jalen Brunson's a great player, but he's not some top 5 MVP player. Okay. Well, I don't know. Maybe he is, or he's close to it. And I think we're also seeing that maybe in the modern NBA, this era of the NBA, I should say. I hate saying modern NBA. I fucking hate that term. It's like so fucking dumb. But in this era of the NBA, this current era, with this CBA, with how the rules are constructed, with everything, and how teams are playing, are we sure that you need a top 3 guy? Like, it's an advantage, obviously, to have a top 3 guy, but it's only an advantage if you don't have gaping holes on your roster. And even the best teams, I think we're seeing, have some limitations in their roster. Like, you're not going to see a level of dominance, I don't think, from an individual team the way you have in past eras at times. Like, OKC's awesome, right? They're an awesome team, but they're not the most gifted offensive team. That's like a fundamental limitation of their group. Some of that being, yeah, they're young, so these guys are going to develop, but that's kind of like the trade-off of, hey, if you want to invest a lot of resources and money into being this elite defensive unit, and they are an elite defensive unit, right? If you want to go pay Isaiah Hartenstein, if you want to invest money into an extension for Lou Dort, if you want to trade for Alex Caruso, then pay him, if you like, etc. We can go on and on. But if you want to invest that much in your defense, yeah, that might come at the cost of some offensive creation. With Indiana, it's almost the opposite, right? And to be clear, Andrew Nemhard and Aaron Nesmith and a lot of these guys have ended up becoming better defenders than I think anybody would have expected. And as a group, I think they defend really well. I think they're schemed up really well. Their coaching is excellent. So they're able to pose problems in different ways. But, I mean, would you say Tyrese Halliburton is a top 5 player? I wouldn't.
I wouldn't say starting to.
I mean, but I that's fine. People can say what they want. But do you think he's an MVP player? Do you think he's going to win MVP in his career? I'd be shocked. No. I'd be shocked. And that's like, I would be shocked if Jalen Brunson won an MVP in his career. I'd be shocked if a lot of guys, like I'd be Jason Tatum just won. Yeah, Tatum just won a championship last year. I don't think outside of fucking, the Ringer and the city of Boston, like, and I don't think anybody thinks he's going to win MVP. But you can win a championship as your best player. You can win a championship, I think, with Tyrese Halliburton as your best player. You can win a championship, I think.
There's 2 games from doing it.
Yeah, you can win a championship with Jalen Brunson as your best player. And these guys, none of them, to me, are ever likely to win MVPs. If I told you a team 20 years ago could win a championship with a guy that was less than an MVP level player, that just, it wasn't possible. Like it
I think it is 20 years exactly since a team without
21.
But yeah, the point remains.
But they're the exception to the rule, right? And we're talking about the Detroit Pistons of 2004. But other than that, right? I mean, we can go through the list. 2000, Lakers. 2001, Lakers, right? So Shaq both times, and Kobe for that matter. 2002, Lakers, Shaq and Kobe. 2003,
Duncan.
Spurs. 2004, the exception. 2005, Duncan again. 2006, Wade, who never won an MVP, but in my opinion was an MVP caliber player. And they had Shaq, right? Shaq, and last good year of Shaq. 2007, Duncan again. 2008, Kobe. 2009, Kobe. Or sorry, 2008
was Garnett.
Garnett. 2009, Kobe. 2010, 2010, Kobe. 2011, Dirk Nowitzki. 2012, LeBron. 2013, LeBron. 2014,
and Wade, right?
Yeah. 2014, dying, embers of.
Yeah, 2014 is the other one because they didn't really Kawhi wasn't Kawhi yet. Maybe he was capable.
And Duncan was certainly not Duncan. But the point is, like, these are throughout NBA history, the majority of the time the consensus has been you can live with your 7th, 8th, 9th guy in a rotation not being that great if you have the best player in a series. And always the consensus has been if you have the best player in the series, you have a serious advantage. And I think what we're seeing now over the last few years, and I think this is just going to increase, is it just doesn't work like that anymore. If you have gaping holes in your roster, there's only so much you can do to cover it up. I mean, we're going on. Giannis hasn't been out of the first round since 2022. Like, Jokic has lost in the second round these last 2 years in a row in Game 7. So, Game 7. So it's not like they got wiped out, but he hasn't been out of the second round in the last 2 years, and he's
lost the first round.
Yeah, and would you say that Jokic is the best? I think everybody agrees Jokic is the best player in the world, and he's not even getting it. Like, we're in a different era, and I think people got to understand that. So to get back to the question you asked me, when I see people blaming the players, and I think it's fine to blame players, they deserve criticism. Mikal Bridges has to be better next year, right? Karl Anthony Towns, I'm sorry, at certain moments, we can't have you brain fart defensively and just be like standing around fucking 10 feet behind the, inside the arc while guys pulling up for a wide open three. Like, we can go on and on down the blame pie list if you want. But, like, to me, it's like, yeah, so now the talent isn't perfect, but you're trying to tell me before the season you thought Indiana was a perfect team? You thought Indiana was going to come out of the East and be right there with the Thunder? Really? Is that really what you think? Because I think that's bullshit. I think what Indiana is showing is that depth matters and coaching matters a lot. When the margins are this fine, when the talent in the league is spread out the way it is, and you can't consolidate and hoard it the way you maybe could have in past eras, especially not top guys, because of the constraints it puts on your overall roster. When that's the case, you need to win on the margins really, really heavily. And those margins change. Like, maybe the margin for the Knicks now is maybe they need a coach who's going to be willing to use regular season to blood young players, bring them along, and develop them so that they're ready for the playoffs. Not maybe not to play 35 minutes or something like that, but hey, we need somebody to chip in for 10, 15 minutes here. Hold the fort down. Give us a different look. Give us options. And if you don't have that, I think it hurts a lot. So, if I were to kind of say anything about Thibs as far as like maybe why he got canned or what it was, I wonder if some of I almost feel like because the way the CBA has changed and the restrictions it's putting on teams, a guy that coaches like him who's so reticent to experiment and to give players opportunities in season if he just doesn't trust them, I think that really it's a drawback for him, especially at the stage the Knicks are at, where it's like, hey man, like we poured in a ton of resources to build out this top 7 in the rotation, right? So that being the starting lineup that we saw all season, plus Deuce McBride, plus Mitchell Robinson. But we did draft 4 guys last year, and we did make some decent, on the margin, veteran minimum level signings. We need you to use that stuff, and we need you to develop that. And if you can't do that, or if you're unwilling to do that, that's just going to be a problem. That's just going to be a problem. And it cuts down our margin for error. And I really do think that was a part of this decision where it's like, we can't, this is not an era. I will flat out say this. I think the era of, you get to the playoffs and you just play 7 guys, that shit is dead, man. That shit is dead. I think it's over. That you cannot just play 7 guys and win a title.
And it's not even a minutes thing. It is the amount of looks you can give, right? Because the thing is this, right? I think the other thing, the more you cannot just optimize your roster for every situation, the more you kind of have to lean in a certain way and have as many different looks as possible, right? It used to be like you can just line up. If you have the best players, that's what's going to matter, and you can't overcome that.
Yeah, not everybody's like the Eagles with their offensive line,
or even like Oklahoma City. But even Oklahoma City, and I don't think they've done a particularly poor job coaching. But I think Indiana's gone to, you have to give Carlisle a ton of credit. They've gone to things that I think are going to become, it's a copycat league. You're going to see teams full court pressing more. You're going to see teams go deeper into the bench. You're going to see teams play some funkier lineups. And I do think Halliburton is a unique player, but I think the point is, like, you need to be able to win many different ways. You can't just impose your identity. You need to have a core identity, which Indiana does, but they've won multiple ways, right? When we trapped Halliburton, they had answers for that. Or when we were pressing Halliburton, they eventually adapted. We go double big, they adapt, right? And if you can't, that's kind of what happened to Boston, right? If a team is going to switch on you and say, beat Cat 101, sure. They didn't have answers. So you need to have as many answers as possible. You need to do the research. Here's what I'll ask you, though, right? Is it that the league is no longer conducive to the best player being kind of the most dominant force? Or is it that the best players are not as good as in the past? And if a guy like Wemby hits his ceiling, does that change things? Because that's what a lot of people have been saying. Like, you have to go for it now because in 2 years, Wemby's going to own the league. Is it because there isn't a Michael Jordan or a Kobe or a prime LeBron? Is that the real reason? Like, Jokic, for as good as he is, isn't that? Giannis, for as good as he is, isn't Wade or something like that?
I think Jokic is as good as any of those. Maybe not as good as Mike or LeBron or something, but like his peak it's up there. I think it's just hard to gauge it, and it's. I just think there's more talent, and it's harder to consolidate the talent now. Like SG, and then the cap is just hard. It's just harder to navigate this stuff. That was the entire purpose of a lot of these changes in the cap rules, right? Is like is to avoid teams being able to kind of just consolidate talent, avoid Miami big three stuff, avoid Kevin Durant going to Oklahoma or to Golden State, avoid and not just their ability to get talent, but like you look at kind of how did Golden State win their last championship? Some of it was luck. You know, they got hot at the right time in the right draw in the conference in the right year, but like they were able to go spend fucking $1 bajillion that season, and you know, I forgot their luxury tax was crazy, but it's like they could afford it. They had Wiggins, they had all these like random things that happened in their favor, and it's just because of their ability to afford it. And it didn't stop you, right, from making certain, like you could aggregate money, you could get into the buyout market and sign players. Like it didn't prevent you from any of that stuff. There was no such thing as pick freezing, right? Oh, if you're over this apron 2 years in a row, your pick 7 years down the line freezes at the end of the round. Like you don't have to deal with any of that shit. Now that you have to deal with it, I mean, it's effectively a hard cap. And you know, we see this in football, and it's kind of actually, I think one of the biggest myths in the NFL is like that there's parity, because there's just not. Like it's usually just you have teams that have the best. Yeah, it's usually if you have the teams that have the best quarterbacks. Philly's kind of the outlier because they've just drafted, their fucking offensive line has been ridiculous, and both lines really. But
they've also had good quarterback. They've had great quarterback play. They've
had solid quarterback play. But either way, the point is like the biggest myth in the NFL is parity. Is like, oh, it's always about like there's such a who knows. It's any given Sunday. It's like I don't know, man. It seems like fucking Mahomes and Brady and these fucking assholes are there every year. So I don't know.
We've had the same matchup 2 out of the last 3 years in the Super Bowl, right?
Well, yeah, and we even had the first Chiefs Super Bowl they won was the one against, it was them and the Niners, which they repeated 2 years ago, right? That was Chiefs or Niners and Chiefs again. So it's like
even the teams without elite QBs, I think Lamar is elite, but even before that, the Ravens were good. The Ravens won a Super Bowl. Ravens, Steelers, right? So it is the same teams and organizations with like blips here and there that kind of perform well, right?
Right. So, and I think the NBA now, we're going to have our 7th different champion in the last 7 years. So it's just a different era. It's a different league. There is more talent. There is more parity. I think teams are smarter, so they are finding different ways to find talent, but also like, okay, I think there's an acceptance of like, and this is kind of like gets to the root of some of the issues we had with Thibs, right? And I think some of the issues just Thibs had in general, where it's like, and this is what I think Carlisle has been so good at in these last couple of years, and honestly through his career. But it's like, okay, I don't have X and I don't have Y. I accept that I do not have those things. Accepting I don't have those things. Now, what is the best things what do I have? What do I actually have? And what is the best way for me to get the absolute maximum of those things? I can obsess over, I could sit here and obsess over, I don't have this, I don't have that thing. At the end of the day, I don't have it. So with the tools at my disposal, how do I get the most out of my situation? Like, you're not, I don't think any of us would be under the impression, if he had better options, I don't think he's running out there with Siakam and Obi in his front court, right? But he does that every single game because he's like, this is the best of what I have. I have got to do this thing, so that's what it is. And with Thibs, like, he would rather have played like Jericho Sims, right, over trying Obi and Randall together, for example. Just like as an example of, oh, okay, my center is hurt. How do I make up these minutes?
It's worth knowing Siakam is a much better defender than Randall.
For sure. But even if it was Siakam, do you think he'd be like, okay, Siakam at the 5? You know, no shot. He wouldn't. And to me, that's not really like, yeah, maybe it is a criticism, but it just is. Like, that's just a fact of how Tom Thibodeau was as a coach.
It's also understanding it's the situational thing, right? There are situations for these things. When you say that, you're like, well, sometimes it might be worth it to put. Kevin Knox was the first guy I remember being labeled situational, right? Maybe there's a time when they had DSJ, right? Is he better than Quickly? No. But somehow this game calls for an elite point of attack defender, right? That is what I've seen from Carlisle, is like There were games where Benedict Mathurin wouldn't play, and then there were games when we were pressing Halliburton, and they needed another creator, so he played him. Right. It's also knowing when and where to do those things and be like 1 through 12. Hey, your number could get called, and your number might not get called. Right. That's a tougher thing to go through, and there's rhythm, and I'm not saying there's not multiple sides to that, but I think it's also like I think there's this whole debate that you and I have kind of touched on a little bit. I think you mentioned Thibs likes to have a threshold level of everything, right? You need this much rebounding, you need this much shooting, this much creation.
And by the way, like in theory, he's right. You know what I mean? In theory, it's like that. Obviously, you want the best of everything.
What happens when you just get mediocre of everything? And then at that point, is it better to go D'Antoni Suns? Or, that's just one example, right? But that was a team that got criticized because they were imbalanced and they doubled down on one thing. It doesn't work every time. And by the way, neither is Obi and Siakam going to work all the time. The question is, though, like, that's another philosophical thing. Like, when are the times to double down and say, fuck the weaknesses? We're just going to, if we have a horrible offensive line, we're just going to 5 wide, throw dink and dump. That's not going to work against every defense. When are the times to do that? I think like all of these have become way bigger questions, I think, than they were in the past. I do want to touch back real quick on what you're talking about with parity, because I did some research into this several years ago, and I know you're a much bigger soccer fan than me. So if you look at the leagues in Europe, right?
Wage bills.
What?
Are you going to say wage bills?
No.
Because that's like basically what it is like if you just look at it over the course of time, whoever wins the leagues, like the best teams, all have the highest wage bills.
Yeah, they do. But if you look within leagues, right? Like the French league has very little parity. It's PSG, Lyon. Bundesliga arguably has less. It's Bayern, and then it's whoever goes for second. Yeah. Italy has a lot of parity, but is less popular. EPL has a little bit of a mix. It was interesting because if you correlate to the popularity of the league, it seems like having a Man U, having a Real Madrid is good for these leagues. Whereas if you look at the MLS, part of it is the quality in general, I think, is lower. But the MLS has prided itself on parity. It has struggled to gain a footing here, right? So, like, is parity necessarily good for the league? I don't know, you just talk about viewership, because what you're missing, right, in this 7 winners in 7 years era is you don't have these kind of dynasty stories. Part of what made the 80s great is that you had these two dynasties competing. You also had Mike had to take it from the Pistons, right? You had these evolving storylines. Are we missing that a little bit now, if given what you've said about the league trending, and is that kind of a loss for the game?
I don't think it's a loss for the game. I think it's a loss. I mean, it depends. Like, I think for casual fans, it might be, where it's like you're tuning in because you're like, oh, I just want to watch them. I just want to see those Bulls teams. I want to see those Lakers teams. I want to see, and it's also like, hey, it's when those teams are dominant, or when any team is dominant, they become a natural villain, right? So it's like there's always like I still remember when Dallas won the championship. In 2011, it was like a huge deal, right? I mean, I still don't know if like somebody like Zach, who's like 10 years old back then, probably can't truly comprehend it, but like that was like a pretty.
Unless you were hated, like I mean, that summer was still the most infamous offseason ever.
And also just like that, especially that first year, it was like, it really was like, if you were not a Heat fan, nobody was rooting for them. Nobody was rooting for them. Everybody's rooting for Dallas. So there is something to that for sure. But I think the league is, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. I haven't watched much of these finals just because I'm like, I hate Indiana and I don't want to watch it. Like, that's it. I'm not that interested in watching it. Not because the basketball is bad. The basketball is great. From the little I have watched, the basketball is great. I think these are both really, really interesting teams. I think they're both unique teams in how they've been constructed, and how they are constructed. So like, if I were not a Knicks fan, I watch the series and I enjoy the shit out of it. But I'm just like, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. Like, after this season, I'm like, this season was fucking so insane to me as a Knicks fan. I feel like the swings were really, really wild. The playoffs were super crazy, and I am cool with just like, I'm down to get through my list of movies and TV that I need to catch up on. And that's what I've been doing. But like as a neutral, I think this is all really good basketball. I think these playoffs have been really fun in general. I think they've been
Is there
really
a
good.
loss of like narratives, right? The narrative
Yeah.
of Michael against the bad
Yeah.
boys. Narrative.
Like I hate that we lost to the Pacers, but I don't know if I were a neutral, I imagine that was like a pretty fun series to watch, right? You had crazy comeback game one, you had a crazy comeback in game three, you had super like awesome individual performances throughout the series. That's a pretty fun series as a neutral, I would think. And you had, Knicks Celtics, I think was a pretty good series. Pacers Cavs only went 5 games, but I think that was a really fun
A
series.
series with the Pistons, every game went to the wire.
Yeah, that was a fun series. I think even Pacers Bucks that opening round, like there were some crazy games in that series. And you can go through the whole playoffs and you'll find it. Like the West had some shit too, right? You had that 7-game series opening round with Clips and Nuggets. I thought the Nuggets Thunder series in round 2 was awesome too. So you had really good basketball throughout. And I don't know. I think the product and the sport itself is in a really good place. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that to kind of get back to the original where we came from this, I think when people want to blame the players and point fingers at everybody for what happened to Thibs, it's like at what point is it on Thibs though? Like you can apportion blame to everybody else, and that's more than okay. But you can't pretend that Thibs did a perfect job. Like this team had a literally a 0.0 net rating in the playoffs. By any measure, to get through to game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals with those type of underlying metrics, it's very rare. Like that's not even just rare, it's unlikely. It's not replicable. Like the odds of that run again is limited. And then you look at the specifics of these games and series, right? Where it's like, I don't know, like you watch that Pistons series, like you mentioned, it was a +8. The Knicks won that series by 8 points total. What that is telling you is that's a coin toss. That's a coin toss. Like you could easily have lost that series. You get called, like Josh Hart gets called for a foul at the end of game 4 on a 3-point shot. You probably lose that game. Maybe that changes how game 5 goes. I don't know. But then you're looking at, okay, now let's say game 5 goes the same exact way. So then you needed a Brunson, you actually get up like 12, 13 points in that second half of game 6, but then you pissed the game away in the same exact ways that you pissed multiple games away throughout the season and throughout that series, and leads away, I should say, not games. And it requires Brunson heroics at the end of game 6 to pull that out, right? Like he has to hit this. I mean, what is really one of the best series winning shots you'll ever see over one of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA in an isolation situation. That's what it takes to win that series. And then you get to Boston and it's like, look, I think that there was a lot of, the Knicks are just getting lucky, copium when the Boston lost games 1 and 2. But if you like go back and watch those games, like you see that because the Knicks had not done this switching scheme this entire season, there was a lot of sloppiness in the first couple of games of that series in terms of executing it. And yeah, they did ride their luck a bit. You give them credit for it.
They fell down behind the starting lineup.
Yeah, and
other lineup saved them, right?
Right, and you fell behind by 20 in both games. Like, do you really think that's like a replicable way to go about?
Is that good process? Is the question.
Yeah, and it's not. And again, you can blame players and that's fine, but then you have to be honest with yourself and really, like, do you really believe that the way he coached in this postseason, the way he coached throughout the season, that was conducive to consistently push the ceiling of the team to where it should be or where it needs to be? I don't think that for a second.
Well, like, does he deserve credit for he was the guy that put the ball in Brunson's hands? Like Brunson has blown up here. Does he deserve credit? Cat had a career year here. Does he deserve credit for those things? Because the way I see it, I say
Cat have a career year
stuff with Brunson. Even when they had Randall, I think Cat had a career year, didn't he? With 24-12, 63 true shooting. Like it was first half heavy, and it could have been better maybe. But the point is, like, I look at it and I see like Cat was really just getting the ball. He wasn't they weren't generating shots for him. He either got in the post or the top of the key, and it was a drive, and he's just running through dudes like he's Jerome Bettis, and it's either a block or a stupid charge or a turnover. And then with Brunson, most of his offense here has been ISO, right? But I am curious if you think there's any, like, to what extent Thibs deserves credit for. A lot of guys have had career years here, right? Randall had career years under Thibs, those kind of things.
I'm not going to give him credit for Jalen Brunson. I'm sorry. Just not going to do it. Jalen Brunson was already trending in that direction. If you want to give him credit for putting the ball in Jalen Brunson's hands, that's cool. I would go ahead and say that probably if you sign a guy to a $100 million contract to play point guard, they're going to get that opportunity no matter who the coach is. They're going to get that shot. So, if you want to say he leaned into it to a level that most other coaches wouldn't have right from the jump, okay. But I think most coaches in his situation, seeing what the contract was,
and even on that note, by the way, they didn't lean into it until Randall got hurt that year. Brunson he was like 25 or 24. He went to like 30 when Randall got hurt, and that's when like JJ Redick was like, "Did anyone mention that Brunson is probably playing better than anyone else in the league at this point?" So, yeah, even that would have that caveat.
I'm just not going to give him credit for that. The Cat thing is, whatever. I don't particularly buy that this was a career year for Cat. I think it was a good year for Cat. I think the best thing I could say is that Thibs didn't fuck Cat over or something. It's not like he like turned Cat into a bum. But Cat's what he is, man. Cat is flawed and he's super talented. And you're gonna see all of that over the course of a season. I wouldn't blame Thibs for Cat's awful defense. I blame Thibs for, okay, if Cat sucks at this thing, don't keep asking him to do that thing. Ask him to do anything else. But so I don't get mad at him for, I don't blame him for the stuff that players are necessarily flawed at. I think it's also incumbent upon you as a coach. How do you mitigate those things? And I think he did a bad job of that throughout the season. What I will give him a ton of credit for is player development. I think over the course of his time in New York, I think obviously the players themselves deserve the most credit, but coaches can hinder player development. We've seen that throughout. I mean, God knows we've seen that on the Knicks, but we've also seen that across the league, and it's always been the case. He has never gotten in the way of player development. Yeah, he might not use those guys as fast as you think that they should. He may not recognize it as fast as he should. He may not trust it as fast as he should. But at the end of the day, like what player has ever come through here and you feel like, whatever his methods are, he never stops guys from having productive careers. They might not be happy with their role here. They might need to leave to get the role they want, but they never leave and are bad because of their experiences under Tom Thibodeau. That's bullshit. He's a good development coach. He's always been a good development coach. And I also think if you buy into the role that he's putting you in, now sometimes he might misidentify you, like we saw that with Josh Hart this year in a lot of ways, or Mikal Bridges or OG, whatever. But if you buy into the role he's giving you and you execute it, you'll have a lot of success in most situations. A lot of guys you can point to: Isaiah Hartenstein, Dante DiVincenzo. I think Emmanuel quickly thrived from that before he wanted more, right? I think a guy like Quentin Grimes thrived in the role that Thibs gave him until he wanted more and got in his feelings a little bit. And I honestly, in Quickly's case, it's not like he was bad. He just, the Knicks weren't going to pay him, and they could use him to get OG Anunoby, so it is what it is. So
and somebody else, and a lot of teams were going to be willing to pay him, right? So,
right, and like a guy like Deuce McBride, who probably wants more. I think he showed some of that frustration at the end of the year. But it's like, if you buy into the things he's selling and he's buy into the role he's giving you, and you can execute it, you'll have success. You'll have success. You'll.
I mean, look at Hartenstein too, right? He made him a generational wealth.
Right. So I mean, and look, the crown jewel of his, and this I will always give him credit for. Nobody can take this away from him. What he did with Julius Randle, 99% of coaches aren't getting that. Not at that stage of Julius Randle's career. 99% of coaches, forget coaches.
Can't you argue Miller started to get that out of him though?
Yeah, but not to the same level. Come on, it was not even close. And also fans, like us as fans, we all wanted the guy gone. we were like, what are we doing here? We
Drafted
drafted
a second round pick in Batum for him,
yeah.
right?
We drafted Obi Toppin 8th. Let's get him on the floor. Let's get Julius the fuck out of here. That's what we were all hoping for, really. Once we drafted Obi, it's like, all right, well, what the hell is Julius still doing here? And Thibs put the ball in his hands, and he
made his read simpler. And Randall has talked about that. There was guys, I think going from Fizdale to any kind of competence is like a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I think Randall knew where guys were going to be in the playoffs. That doesn't help because teams adapt. But and you didn't even mention, I don't think, Midge, right? But you can say his natural development. I do think with big men, Tom Thibodeau's system like just gets you robot. Like we haven't had bad center play really the whole time, right? He turned Nerlens Noel stepped in for Mitch that year, but Mitch, like, listen to how we talk about him now. Do you remember what he was like when he was 21, 22 years old? Granted, yes, guys change from that. Foul prone. I mean, dude, he didn't box out. He's one of the best defensive rebounders in the league while being a great rim protector. Do you remember how horrible he was as a rebounder? Like, he could get those putbacks. He was, some of that is strength gains. But he's a defensive quarterback. That to me has actually been the most impressive development, even more than Randall. For Thibs was Mitch. I definitely give him credit for that. I'm just not going to give him credit for Brunson.
The Brunson thing. I'm come on. It's like people were. I remember people were giving Jason Kidd credit. I'm like I guess if you want to give Jason Kidd credit, the credit is he was like, okay, I'm going to give you I'm putting the ball in your hands. I'm going to let you cook. But it's not like Jason Kidd was running some advanced sets that elevated Brunson. You know what I mean? Like this is not Brunson is not the case of a player who's the coaching is elevating him. Like who is anybody giving Rick Carlisle credit for Tyrese Halliburton's development? Last time I checked, nobody's
good because they do run a system that actually gets the most. That is
but it's getting right. But I think Halliburton is going to get numbers and have a positive impact wherever he goes. It maybe it's not to the same level as Carlisle's getting out of them, which speaks to Carlisle's level. But like stars are going to be stars wherever they go. That's how it works. Now the impact of a star can be muted or it can be elevated by coaching and circumstance and situation. And I would say that to some extent, Thibs was probably a little bit of a mixed bag with Brunson. I think he elevated what he could do, his impact on ball. And I think he was not good enough about utilizing Brunson's gravity off ball.
But even on ball, like you're just giving him the ball most of the time, especially in the fourth, and like save us, Jalen. That's what especially this season. But I think it's been the case certainly in the playoffs.
It certainly feels like Hugh had, if nothing else, I'm not sure what the play calls are, but there is an element of like we'll run this action, but ultimately it's down to you what you want to do, like what your reads are, and that's good for Jalen. I'm not sure how, but I also think that puts a lot of pressure on him, and I think that pressure, in terms of like keeping guys happy, you're putting it all on his shoulders. Where it's like, okay, you need to balance the fact that I need you to like kind of run the offense, look for your scoring, but also make sure you're keeping your teammates involved. And it's just a lot of pressure, man. I think there's not an appreciation for how much you're asking of him, mentally, to get all that stuff done. And it's hard because, it's hard to keep Mikal Bridges happy and OG Anunoby happy and Karl-Anthony Towns happy and figure out, how what's the best way to have Josh on the floor here if they're not going to defend him and all this type of stuff. It's just hard. So, I'll give Thibs plenty of credit. I've given him a ton of credit for his time in New York. I think his time was up. I think this was a good time for him to leave. And the last thing I'll say too about this is people are like going to be, it was such a shitty way to do this. He deserved another year. It's like, there's never going to be a good time to fire somebody. Never in life have you ever lost your job and been like, you know what? This was a really good time for me to lose my job. That doesn't happen. Nobody's like, you know what? The way they handled it though was really good. So therefore I'm happy about losing my job. It's not possible. It's always gonna be messy when you fire somebody. And this idea that they owed him another year. Okay, let's say they gave him another year and then they lost in the first round. And then they fired him. Would that would be better?
And that win, because we've talked about how much the title windows are compressed, in the past, you might have had that luxury, right? Which, by the way, hasn't always existed. George Karl got fired after winning Coach of the Year. We saw it happen with Dwayne Casey. Like this is not the first coach who's had success, done well.
Well, I'll throw one at you. What if I told you there was a coach who led his team to a 50-win season for the first time in 6 years, led his team to a playoff series win the following year for the first time in 7 years, and was fired?
Is that something I might be interested in?
Yeah, that's JB Bickerstaff. And then the Cavs fired him. They hired Kenny Atkinson. And pray tell, who won Coach of the Year this year? Oh, it was Kenny Atkinson, right? And
it was the guy who hired Johnny Bryant.
Yes. And did you hear anybody talking about, oh, they did JB Bickerstaff dirty and oh my God, like what, like there's none of that. Because
I think part of it is people have regarded that Cavs roster better than the Knicks since that Donovan Mitchell. I think if you flip the rosters, the reaction would still be the exact fucking same. Because I think that's just it. Like people will shit on the Knicks no matter what. I mean, I've never seen a team make the Eastern Conference Finals and be discussed like they have nothing good happening on their roster. Nobody's good on the roster. Everything is a disaster. I don't believe that. I think that as good of a coach as Tom Thibodeau is, and I do believe he's a really good coach, I think this group challenged him in ways that exposed some of his limitations. And I think their success this season overcame his limitations as a coach in a lot of ways. Not to say the roster is perfect. It's not perfect. We know that. But I think the success they had was largely down to the talent on the roster. And so to say and to operate and talk about this team like, they all stabbed Thibs in the back and what I mean. There's like the Jon Snow scene.
Yeah, I mean it's like fucking the Ides of March or something. But like to I don't know. Again, just to circle back to it, but I just think the idea that guys like he got stabbed in the back. I mean, these guys sucked up whatever their differences were and issues with coaching to deliver how many, like 2 20-point comebacks, three 20-point comebacks in the playoffs, 2 in the Celtics series, multiple double-digit comebacks in the Detroit series. Like you don't do that if your team is actively trying to sabotage the coach or is quitting or doesn't care or isn't competing. These guys, did their issues with the coaching and whatever and everything going on with the team, did that manifest in their play at times? There's no doubt about it. It absolutely did. But what's also worth recognizing is that when that happened, they consistently found a way to snap back and respond. And they did that sometimes in the middle of games, at the end of games, between games, whatever. They always found a way. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this was my favorite Knicks team of all time. It definitely wasn't. It certainly wasn't. But I think they showed a lot of resilience, and I think they showed a lot of professionalism, to be honest. But yeah, like at a certain point, what Thibs was saying, right, was winning is more fun than fun is fun. Well, sometimes like winning isn't fun. Yeah, like sometimes winning isn't fun if you're like, well, do I get to help or do I just get to watch Jalen Brunson and dribble around and watch Karl Anthony Towns get designed post-ups that are telegraphed and like space the floor for these guys? Like, am I even going to play tonight? Is my contribution appreciated? Those are things that matter too. So, I just think that this group, again, like I think this was a group beyond him in a lot of ways, challenged him in the areas that he's deficient in as a coach. And ultimately as the front office, the choice you got to make is it worth it for us to reshape the roster to accommodate the coach now again? Or do we believe in the talent here to the point that, yeah, you know what? Unless we believe that Thibs can change certain things about his style as a coach, it makes sense for us to move on. And I think the clear-cut answer, if you're being objective, if you're looking at the process, if you're not just living and dying by the results, I think it was pretty clear that the path they took to getting as far as they did was not a replicable one. It was not a sustainable one. And it was time for a different voice to come in. and we'll see who that is. I guess we can close with this real briefly because we've been doing this for a while here. But the Knicks apparently will have interviews with Taylor Jenkins and Mike Brown this week. They have apparently there's still interest with Kidd. There's still a chance Kidd works his way out. My gut read on that is I think Kidd's trying to get. I think they'll get an extension done with him and his assistants, which seems to be probably the big holdup there. But I thought the report yesterday from CP of KFTV, Knicks Fan TV, he mentioned that the front office is prioritizing looking for a coach that's willing to collaborate with the front office and have better alignment. What do you
collaborate and listen?
Yeah, stop collaborating. But I mean, I think that's kind of telling, right? If that is kind of their stated goal, like I think it's telling about what the issues were this year.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Thibs. I'm sure Thibs has good relationships with all of his assistant coaches, but I think it is very much
he's a general.
Yeah, which you need.
But is he a floor general? You never know. Yeah.
Is he a wartime general? No, I mean, I think in general, I think that probably is something where you want someone, if they're open to feedback, it means they're going to try more things. I think it's the root thing, right? We have to find edges because we knew the best. Brock Aller is, I don't know if he has a finance background or what, but he certainly seems to, and I'm not talking about money or contracts. He's looking for small edges. That's what his job is. And that is how I think the front office approaches things when they have contracts, even on the floor strategy, right? When they look at things like getting floaters and how that impacts offensive rebounding. In this world where there is parity, where you don't have just an order advantage, you have to grind and you have to find those advantages. So I think that's part of it. I do want to talk about a couple of the candidates. So one guy who's been brought up, who's interesting, is I think he's well respected. He's also been fired a couple of times. Is Mike Brown. And it's interesting because I've always thought of Mike Brown as a defensive coach, but one of his, I don't want to say claims to fame, but like one of the things he's highly touted for was kind of the offensive turnaround in Sacramento, right? When they had Sabonis at the 5, they're playing 5 out, and they had a lot of creative stuff. What do you make of Mike Brown as a candidate?
I like Mike Brown. I think he's a creative coach. I think he's obviously shown a willingness to give his assistants a chance to kind of put their fingerprints in the operation. Yordi Fernandez was his assistant coach, who did a lot of or was at least a big factor in some of the offensive success they had in Sacramento. This is a guy who played a lot more half-court oriented offense when he was with Cleveland initially, and then with the Lakers. And then he went, spent some time in Golden State, went to Sacramento, and then had them running up and down the floor. So if you're looking at a coach that you want to see has shown evolution in his approach, that's pretty encouraging. Defensively, he's always been a really good defensive mind. It's kind of funny that the way people talk about him now, because I'm like, you understand, like his entire thing was that he was a defensive kind of guru. That was his background. I think people have lost sight of that because of his time as head coach of the Kings. But yeah, I think he'd be a strong hire. I understand people's trepidation with him. What I would say is I think he's been very unlucky and maybe not discerning enough in some of his decision making in the situations he landed in. I think he was always going to be a patsy in LA when he went there. He was following Phil Jackson right after they had won a couple of championships, and it was the end of an era. Like he was always going to be a patsy there. And they were already like heavily rumored to be talking to D'Antoni while he started his second season. It was just a bad situation for him. Then he goes back to Cleveland. Should have never gone back to Cleveland. That team was a disaster. That was the post-LeBron era. He's coaching Kyrie and Waiters. It was a mess. He should not have gone back there. The King situation, I think he did a really good job for what he was handed, but they just did not improve the roster over time. Like their big acquisition over 3 years there, or 2.5 years that he was there, was getting DeMar DeRozan. You know what I mean? Like it's just not, that's not good enough. And I think he's not a perfect coach. He certainly had some weird stuff in Sacramento with Keon Ellis initially when he was young, in his first stops in his career. He was very simplistic, very vanilla with his offense. There was real change in Sacramento, but it's also worth noting their offense fell off a bit this year with Yordi Fernandez going to Brooklyn. Now, is that all because Yordi left, or is there some, talent bleeds off the roster? You had a guy like DeRozan who changes a lot of how you need to run things. That's something to consider.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think Brown, if he's an option, I think I prefer him to Taylor Jenkins. I think, for all the doom talk that people have, I think the Knicks are going to end up with a pretty credible hire. It's either going to be they trust Johnny Bryant or they go with one of these two guys. That's kind of what it seems like. I'm sure they're looking at college coaches. They're doing all of this. I think the hand wringing and like, oh my God, the coaching search is a disaster, and they're running around with their. I think it's looked pretty methodical. They're calling lots of coaches, lots of teams with coaches to just see if there's interest. They're leaving no stone unturned. They're getting guys paid. Donovan just got an extension. Looks like Kidd is on that path, and they're also setting up interviews. So I think that part of the coverage has been a little bit surprising to me. I think people thought, well, if you're getting rid of Thibs, you got to have the guy right there. I think a lot of that comes from the belief that Thibs himself gave them a high floor, which, to the points we've made, maybe that there is something to that. Like, yeah, you said they played really hard. They never let go of the rope. They won 51 games. Some of that probably is Thibs, right? And we know there's things that he does. He has them prepared every night. Like, they know what going in, what the opponent's going to do. But there was a lot of sloppiness. There wasn't continuity, and they did have to rely on Brunson being heroic. So maybe Brunson is the floor. And in that case, I think, yeah, go through a whole search. Look at this. You're trying to win a championship. You can't just have a preconceived notion. There's also fewer reasons to believe they just sandbagged him, because if they did have the guy, I think if they just hired someone the next day, they would have thought, oh, yeah, they were doing back channels even when Thibs is getting them to the Eastern Conference Final. So you can't really win that game. But I think all in all, there's reasons to be encouraged. We'll see what they do. I'm not a big Jason Kidd guy, but it's tough to fault much of the process so far.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. I agree with you. I think there'll be plenty of candidates. Kidd's not my favorite coach, mostly because of his off-court issues and general personality. But, as a coach, I don't mind him as a candidate. Again, I would rather just not deal with that. And I think that I don't know. The closer it gets to the draft and free agency, it feels like he's probably going to stick in Dallas. We'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, we'll see what happens. All right, I think it's a good place to end this. Stacy, anything that you wanted to plug before we get out of here?
Nothing to plug. I'll plug my Twitter. I'm StacyPatton89. And I'll plug the Strickland basketball team at the tournament. Go out and check our guys out if you're in the area on the July 4th weekend.
Yes, we'll be in the next Twitter basketball tournament. It's on July 5th. I'll be in uniform. Not sure I'll be playing. Hopefully I won't be playing for our sakes.
He's going to be arguing with the ref like Avon. Talking about a fucking do-over, bro. Can't do that shit.
I'll be losing track of timeouts and failing to call appropriate adjustments out. That'll be what I'll do. All right. I have nothing to plug myself, so I'll just plug all the work at Strickland. Check it out. Everybody's doing good shit, so give it a listen, give it a read, give it a follow. All right. That is our show for today. Hope everybody has a great evening, and I will see you on Friday. Peace.